make you nervous.
Hi guys.
A tragedy, I'm a beautiful disaster. A reckoning, you wonder how I got this way.
Hi guys. Sorry about that. I forgot that I was doing the intro. Listen, really quickly, I wanted to come on and do this video about Donald Trump's hush money conviction in New York, that Stormy Daniels hush money case where the New York prosecutor Alvin Bragg won the case where he charged Trump with 34 felonies for, you know, falsifying his business records to conceal a cover up and trying to shut up Stormy Daniels so that he could have a better chance of winning the election. So he basically paid her off. Then he covered up his business records to make it look like that money went someplace else. So this was a falsification of business records. So Alvin Bragg won that case in New York on the state level, and Trump is appealing the conviction. And Trump has hired one of the top law firms in New York, if not the world. If I'm not mistaken, I think Sullivan and Cromwell might even have an office here in Paris, right? But they certainly have one in New York. They're one of the top law firms in New York. And, someone like me could not even step into the lobby. Let's put it that way. Okay. But the fact that they're on the case, I think really says a lot about how serious Trump is about getting this conviction overturned. And guess what? On appeal, I think he has a very good chance of getting it overturned. I just put an article up in the post section. You can check it out. I wanted to put it on video because I've noticed that I come up with some really great ideas over here. Then I hear it all over the internet. Nobody ever says, oh, I heard that over on Marion Chronicles. No, they act like they came up with the idea, you guys. So I'm going to have to start to put more of my stuff onto video so that I can say, no, I made that video on this day at this time and you came 3 days later. Okay. So that was me. Okay. Because when you're a girl and you're a DEI girl, I mean, nobody gives you credit for anything. Okay. Now, remember, you heard it here first. This is going to go down on appeal. I think this case goes down on appeal. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I don't care, really. I have nothing to lose. But I do think it goes down on appeal. And I'm going to tell you why. Let me explain. So first, the introduction. So Alvin brought this case against Donald Trump, and he made history with the case, but I don't think it was necessarily for the right reasons, right? Because he did secure 34 felony convictions for falsifying business records, and it does look like a win, but I think that the legal foundation upon which the case is built is very uncertain, and it's untested legal theories. He made up the law. I mean, it was arbitrary what Bragg did, right? Bragg took what was a misdemeanor offense under New York law, and he elevated it to a New York State felony by tying it to an alleged federal election law violation, something a state prosecutor has no authority to prosecute. He's a state prosecutor. He does not have jurisdiction over a federal felony, okay? He just doesn't. That's just the law. I mean, there's a separation between the state and the federal laws for the purposes of things like elections. And a state prosecutor like Bragg does not have jurisdiction over this case. So as Trump's legal team prepares to challenge the verdict, the case faces a high probability of being overturned or reduced on appeal, in my opinion, my very humble opinion, you guys, okay? So here's why I think Bragg's prosecution is on shaky ground and why his decision to stretch the limits of state law could ultimately backfire. He should have just stuck with a state misdemeanor for falsifying business records and left it at that. But he opted to a state felony using the election law violation or campaign finance violation, which put it right out of his jurisdiction. He was out of his lane, and the federal courts and the Supreme Court is going to strike this case down, okay? the appellate court and then ultimately the Supreme Court is going to strike this case down, because I don't think the case was in federal court. It was in state court, which to me already was a problem, because this was clearly a hybrid situation. You have a state issue where he falsified business records in New York, right? But then you're going to tie that to federal election campaign finance laws. This is clearly a hybrid, and it seems to me that federal law should have preempted state law. This case should have been brought, first of all, in federal court, not state court, yada, yada, yada. Okay? Now, the basic issues and facts of the case. So, in May 2024, former President Donald Trump was convicted in a Manhattan courtroom on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records related to hush money payments made to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg brought the case, arguing that Trump misclassified these payments as legal expenses when they were actually reimbursements to his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, for a scheme meant to influence the 2016 election. Okay, that's probably true, right? Now, on its face, falsifying business records in New York is a misdemeanor. It's a misdemeanor, not a felony, okay? However, Bragg elevated the charge to a felony by arguing that Trump falsified the records to commit or conceal another crime, in this case, a federal campaign finance violation. This is where he got in trouble. He overreached. Bragg, you overreached, my brother, okay? Now, emphasis here is on the word federal. So out of the starting block, in my opinion, Bragg was dealing with a hybrid situation, and it is unclear if he even had jurisdiction, given that he is a state prosecutor. This is what the Supreme Court is going to say. Just mark my words, okay? Just take this to the bank, right? That's why I should be getting $1,000 an hour, okay? And guess what I get? Negative, okay? Nothing. But they come on, they take my ideas, and they make big bucks, okay? Now, this case raises important federal question issues, and it begs to question whether Bragg's prosecution of Trump was preempted by federal law out of the starting block. My answer to that is absolutely it was. Yes, absolutely it was. Ultimately, the question on appeal becomes, can a state court use federal election law as the basis for enhancing a state crime? Again, can a state court like New York use federal election law as the basis for enhancing a state crime? Bragg seems to have answered that question in the affirmative by arbitrarily creating new law. He created like this hybrid, state law, right? State felony. However, his legal theory is unprecedented and untested, and it raises serious jurisdictional and legal concerns that could make the conviction vulnerable on appeal, in my opinion. Okay? This is my opinion, you guys. While Bragg secured a conviction in Manhattan State Court, Trump's legal team, now backed by powerhouse firm Sullivan and Cromwell, is preparing an appeal that could see the felony charges downgraded back to a misdemeanor or thrown out entirely, you guys. So let's talk about the hybrid nature of the case and the limits of state prosecutors. The biggest flaw, in my opinion, in Bragg's case is that it tries to create a hybrid crime, a state offense, which is falsifying business records, that becomes a state felony only because it allegedly involved a federal election violation. This raises serious state versus federal law conflicts, in my opinion. Oh my God, to a rat. Sorry about that. That was my phone. Could you hear that ringing? They do that whenever I'm trying to, I get into something. They start calling me. Nobody ever calls me until I'm on the phone making a video. Okay, so where was I with this before I was so rudely interrupted? So it raises serious state and federal law conflicts. So prosecutors cannot enforce federal law. I'm going to run out of time. Oh my goodness, on this video. So Bragg is a state prosecutor. He's not a federal official, right? He has no authority to prosecute violations of the Federal Election Campaign Act, FECA, or any other federal election laws. He's a state prosecutor. Normally, only the Federal Election Commission or the U.S. Department of Justice can bring cases related to federal campaign finance violations. In this case, no such case was ever brought against the defendant Trump. So no such case was ever brought against the defendant Trump. So the very notion that he, quote unquote, violated federal campaign finance laws is not even settled as a matter of law. There hasn't been a trial. There hasn't been a charge. There hasn't been a due process procedure. There hasn't been a conviction. Nothing, right? So this is just Bragg's opinion here. No jury, no judge has adjudicated Donald Trump, the defendant, of having violated federal campaign finance laws, federal election laws, right? They probably should have, but they didn't, right? And Bragg never charged Trump with this crime or any other crime for that matter, right? And in New York, there's certain specific ways that you can elevate a misdemeanor to a felony, right? Certain types of crimes, etc. But no other crime was charged here by Mr. Bragg against the defendant Trump. Bragg claimed Trump committed another crime, a campaign finance violation, but he never actually charged Trump with this crime. Nor could he, even if he wanted to, because Bragg is a state prosecutor and it is a federal offense to violate campaign finance laws, right? So it's outside of Bragg's jurisdiction, out of the starting block. The legal theory here is unprecedented, right? No other New York prosecutor has ever turned a federal election issue, to my knowledge anyway, but don't quote me on any of this, you guys. I don't think it's ever happened where a New York prosecutor has turned a federal election issue into a state felony enhancement in New York or any other state for that matter, right? Now, appeals courts may not allow this expansion of state power. So if Bragg's theory is upheld by the appeals court and ultimately the Supreme Court, it could open the door for other states to prosecute federal candidates over campaign-related conduct, leading to state-by-state lawfare, like partisan, politically motivated lawfare in national elections. This does not seem sustainable as a matter of law. The U.S. Supreme Court has historically been protective of federal election laws, and conservative justices may be eager to set a precedent limiting state-level prosecutions of federal candidates like Donald Trump. AL. Okay? Ultimately, this quote-unquote hybrid prosecution, right? It was a twofer, could be ruled legally improper and end up gutting Bragg's case on appeal. Okay, now, how do misdemeanors become felonies in New York in the first place, and why this case fails all of those tests? Under New York law, apparently, don't quote me, but I think this is correct, falsifying business records is, in fact, a misdemeanor as Bragg charged, unless it is done to commit or conceal another crime, which then elevates it to a felony. Okay, fine. We can all agree that that makes sense. However, for this enhancement to apply, there usually needs to be a clear, provable underlying crime. For you to elevate a crime from a misdemeanor to a felony in New York, there needs to be a clear, provable underlying crime. How do misdemeanors become felonies in New York? That's another question that the appellate lawyers over at Sullivan Cromwell are going to ask the court, right? One way is with a prior conviction. If the defendant has a criminal record that makes them eligible for felony charges, but that doesn't apply to Trump. If there are aggravating factors is a second way. If the offense involves weapons, violence, or vulnerable victims, this is not applicable to this case against Trump. If a third way, intent to commit or conceal another crime. This is what Bragg relied on with Trump, but it's legally weak because Trump was never convicted of an underlying crime, right? So to conceal another crime, you have to first be if the prosecutor is going to elevate from misdemeanor to felony, there needs to be a conviction of that underlying crime at a minimum. I'm thinking, right? Bragg's key problem in this case is that there was no federal conviction for the campaign finance breaking of the campaign finance laws, and so therefore, without that, he can't get a state felony to stick, right? It's going to be thrown out on appeal. Bragg argues that Trump falsified records to cover up a federal campaign finance violation, but Trump was never charged with or convicted of any federal crime, you guys. I mean, I'm not defending Trump. I'm just speaking solely from, a legal, a legal perspective. It's like, you need to dot your I's and cross your T's, right, in order to convict somebody in this way and up a misdemeanor to a felony, right? I think this is where Bragg's case will utterly fall apart. Bragg is not a judge or jury. He's a prosecutor. He may think and believe, and perhaps he's absolutely 100% right, that Trump committed a crime by covering up the hush money payment, but he has to prove it. He has to prove that Trump, in fact, did violate campaign finance laws in a court of law, possibly before a jury, right? He has to prove his case. He has to give Trump due process to defend himself against his case. And then once he's convicted, then he can say, well, there was this underlying crime, and so I'm going to up this misdemeanor to a felony. But this is not what happened here, right? So basically what Bragg is doing is that he is using his own personal opinion and to some extent maybe his biases. And look, that's not even a judgment. It's just to say that, it's probably some biases there that he might have against this defendant and all the things this defendant has done. But he can't use that, which is really just his opinion, without an actual conviction in a federal court, to elevate a New York State misdemeanor to a New York State felony, right? I think the court, the appellate court or the Supreme Court is going to throw this out on that basis alone. The New York appellate courts could rule that a state felony enhancement cannot be based on an unproven, out-of-jurisdiction federal crime. If the appeals court finds that Bragg improperly elevated a misdemeanor, Trump's felony conviction could be overturned or reduced back down to a misdemeanor, significantly weakening the case's impact, on Trump and his reputation and so on. Now, Bragg should have simply stuck with the misdemeanor charge, right? Had Bragg stayed in his lane, he might have secured a clean, defensible conviction on misdemeanor charges. Instead, he overreached, turning a straightforward business records case into a legally complex, politically charged prosecution, which now opens the door for Trump to justifiably accuse him of lawfare. Right? A misdemeanor conviction for falsifying business records would have been much harder for Trump to overturn. Trump still would have been convicted of breaking the law, but without the legal vulnerabilities that now threaten Bragg's case. Right? So Bragg's overreach here could totally backfire. By overcharging Trump, Bragg handed Trump's legal team at Sullivan and Cromwell a strong appeal argument, right? And they make the big bucks for a reason, right? Some of these guys, apparently, they were Supreme Court clerks. They clerked for the Supreme Court. So you know where they're heading with this case, right? And the court being what it is, Trump is going to get away with this. So if the felony conviction is thrown out, Bragg's entire prosecution will look politically motivated and legally flawed, right? And, maybe it kind of was a little bit of, political lawfare there. The bigger consequences of this case, so if this legal theory fails on appeal, it will set a precedent against state prosecutors using federal laws as a backdoor for felony charges. Future state level attempts to prosecute federal candidates on federal election related matters will face very high scrutiny, right? So Bragg gambled really big, and now he might lose really big, right? So I guess that's it. I mean, the rest of this article, you can pretty much read it yourself in the post/community section of this YouTube channel. I tried to put it up on my Substack as well. I'm now on Substack. It's new. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I think it might have been too long, whatever. But you should definitely check out my Substack as well. But that's all for this one, you guys. I'm going to stop here, okay? But I think that this case is going to implode on appeal, right? What are your thoughts about this case? Do let me know in the comments. Don't forget you heard these arguments here first. There's nobody else on YouTube that's talking about this yet. But once they start and you start hearing all these arguments, you know where this came from, okay? See you in the next one. Take care. Bye.
I make you nervous, a tragedy, I'm a beautiful disaster, a reckoning, you wonder how I got this way.